Welcome back to another episode on The Gold Room. Today we have Ben Smith from Holyoake. Thank you very much for joining me, mate.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
Excellent. Look, we always start, as you know, we start off with the life and the times. Passion of mine is finding out about others. So hit us with it, mate.
Sure. I suppose from a starting point, I'm a Perth born and bred boy, fiercely proud West Australian, and grew up in a really loving, supportive household, something I'm very grateful for and I don't take for granted, particularly given the work I'm doing now. I'm the son of an industry school principal and a ward nurse, my mother being a ward nurse, my father being a school principal, and my two sisters are school teachers. So caregiving and supporting other people is absolutely in my DNA. From a career perspective, grew up playing a lot of sport and naturally followed that passion into academic study.
What sports did you like, mate?
AFL is my first love.
Who's your team?
I tell my wife that often as well, that AFL is my first love. My team is Fremantle, so I'm a Foundation, I apologise.
No, that's fine,
I'm a
mate.
Foundation 95 inaugural member, as with the rest of the family. So that's a really important part of, I suppose, my background and history as well is the disappointment that I've experienced as a Fremantle supporter for many, many years.
There's a huge team of you, mate.
Oh,
so, you
yeah,
know,
absolutely. There's many of us.
drown your sorrows.
Yeah, we support each other. There's plenty of different support groups as a Fremantle member. But look, I love my footy and I've been playing it since I can remember. Followed in my dad's footsteps and my uncle's footsteps in that regard, and now my two boys play as well. So
Cool. How old are your boys?
So 5.5 and 3.5.
Wow, beautiful ages.
My eldest, great ages. My eldest has just launched his Auskick career, to which I'm coaching, and then in the afternoons I'm still hanging on for dear life, so still running around myself. Yep. Far too old to be fair, and I'm coaching too. So my Saturdays is pretty much just football from start to finish, which I love. And that's a real release for me, from a career perspective as well. So I think it's really important to maintain those hobbies outside of career and outside of work, so you can really switch the brain off. So love my footy. I'm traditionally known to have played anything that bounces. So I've tried all sorts of sports. I've had the privilege of representing Australia and Western Australia in a couple of different sports as well.
What are they, mate?
So touch rugby and Gaelic football. So some fairly unusual sports where there's not a big participation base, so you have a higher likelihood of success representing your state or your country. Yeah. But yeah,
touch
just
rugby,
sports.
Touch rugby's quite big.
It is. Yeah, it's obviously you'd know a lot about that. I know in NZ it's massive and big on the East Coast. Was rather large here when I was young. But just a great sport that I love and don't play anymore, but have a lot of respect for touch rugby athletes because it's quite difficult, especially running backwards at light speed. Yeah. And outside of that now, I'm fairly simple when it comes to sport. I'm just playing footy, a little bit of golf occasionally when the time allows. But really anything that bounces or moves, I'm fairly interested in or involved in.
Awesome.
And that's a big part of my identity as well is sport. So studied sports management and did that alongside a business major, including organisational behaviour, which is something I really enjoyed. And I've taken that org behaviour, academia, certainly into my career and used that to advantage. So that was a great start from a career point of view. I actually launched myself into local government, worked at the city of Wanneroo while I was studying full time, and then moved over to the city of Bayswater, and I was in recreation facility type roles, driving around in a Ford Ranger, making sure that football posts were in the right place or, fields were marked accurately for different sporting clubs within the cities. And at the same time, I went into a business competition called Business Icon, which is similar to the Apprentice.
Wow.
And that was a great experience for me.
What did you do?
I ended up, so it was there was a significant application pool, about 500 applications that year, and they whittle it down to a final 40. You're brought into basically a 10-day business competition. And every 24 or 48 hours, they eliminate a series of participants, very much similar to The Apprentice, without the "you're fired" piece each day.
That bloke ended up as a bloody
We know where he is now, don't we? So I won't say much more about that. But look, it was a great experience, and I ended up winning the competition.
Well done, bro.
So that
Awesome.
was great, and it was a real sort of moment in my career in a sense that I went back to my role at the City of Bayswater. And I received a promotion fairly quickly thereafter. And then through that process as well, I received some mentorship and I had some access to a gentleman by the name of Richard Goyder, who is an absolute gentleman and gave me a couple of hours of his time over a couple of different meetings. And one of the sort of key pieces of feedback that Richard gave me around my career and where I wanted to go to was that government was a great place to work. You learn amazing skills when it comes to governance, red tape, policy, procedure, process, and so forth. But he suggested that there was going to be more sort of fast-track developmental opportunities for me in the private sector. And so I still wanted to stay in that sports space. And Perth being a small market, it must have been the sort of 2010-11 sort of period. I really only wanted to work at probably 4 places, and that was the 4 professional sporting clubs. So Fremantle, naturally, West Coast, the Perth Glory or the Perth Wildcats. And so, but surprise, surprise, no jobs, and it was really difficult to crack into the market. So from there, I thought, well, I'll just create my own luck. And I spent the next 6 to 7 months, the first Tuesday of each month, calling those 4 sporting clubs and just basically harassed the receptionist to let me through to speak to someone who would be interested in employing me. And I think it was about the 6th or 7th month, the receptionist at the Perth Wildcats passed my call through to Nick Marvin, who I was asking to speak to. And Nick was the managing director of the Wildcats at the time. And then somehow I got through. He took my call.
Awesome.
And he said to me, look, I appreciate that you've been calling, for 6 or 7 months now. And he said, anyone that persistent will be able to sell sponsorship in a cold calling environment. So he invited me in for a meeting. I met him properly and Troy Georgiou, who was the chief commercial officer at the time as well. And walked out of that meeting with a job as a sponsorship sales agent. I jumped at that opportunity, went to the Wildcats over in Floreat, spent a year there. Most of my time was cold calling people, convincing them to buy a sponsorship asset from the club. And probably the most exciting thing for me, and a theme probably through my career, is the timing component. When I arrived there, we were transitioning from Challenge Stadium over to the brand new Perth Arena. So I had an opportunity to sell assets into a brand new, beautiful, sexy, shiny toy in Perth, and that made selling sponsorship a lot easier. And it was an amazing year. From there, my girlfriend or partner at the time had come home. I'd just built my first home in my early 20s. And she was living with me, and she came home and said, do you want to move to Melbourne? And I said, well, what are you talking about? And she'd been headhunted by a small company called L'Oreal. So over we went to Melbourne. It was a really simple decision for me, but, being the sporting mecca of the Southern Hemisphere, off we went. And before I arrived, I'd been able to land a job at Basketball Australia, obviously through the Perth Wild connections. And I was really grateful for that opportunity. And the role was very similar to what I was doing at the Wildcats, but on a national level. So I went over there as the national BDM, again, selling sponsorship assets and trying to make a name for myself in a big city. Had some great success there, sold some really great assets. Particular milestones included selling the naming rights to the Women's National Basketball League to Wattle Valley, and the Aussie Hoops, which is the junior game development program for Basketball Australia, selling that naming rights asset to Vicinity Centres, who are major competitor to Westfield as another brand in that space. So had some really great wins and really enjoyed that sort of period of chasing the impossible sale, and often was told that no one wanted to sponsor women's basketball in Australia or the junior game development program. But I took those comments as challenges and was really proud of some of those sales. From there, I'd also cut a deal with the Boomers and the Opals, being the two national basketball teams for men and women. And as a byproduct of a deal I did with 2XU or 2XU, the sports compression brand, the head of commercial a few weeks later called me up and said, "Hey Ben, I'm moving to the US to run our US business. Are you interested in my job?" And I thought, what an amazing opportunity. I know nothing about consumer goods or selling consumer goods. I know a thing or two about sales and relationships, but knew zero about the sector, and thought to myself, well, fake it till you make it. So off I went to 2XU. I ended up being there for about 4 years, worked in a variety of different roles there, like I did at BA. And that was probably where my career really exploded. When I arrived there, that was a founder-led business that was owned by 3 incredible entrepreneurs. And the business was exciting, fast-paced, energetic. We were selling assets like nobody's business. Our compression socks and our compression tights were just flying off the shelves around the world. And the business was growing, and it was a really amazing sort of organisation to be associated with. Then about 2 or 3 years into my tenure there, the 3 founders sold the business to private equity. So they sold the business to Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy El Catterton, which is the largest private luxury goods PE fund in the world. And that for me was a real eye-opening couple of years. And it was an interesting period. Traditionally, PE funds will come in, they'll gut the business and try and scale it for resale. So they were looking to cut costs wherever they could, which was to be expected. And again, I found myself in a position where I was one of the last executives standing from the old guard.
Wow.
Ended up working with the CFO, sort of co-steering the PMO or the project management office. And again, learnt so much, through that period, being exposed to, the private equity lords based in Singapore, and learnt a thing or two about myself and about resilience and playing the game. That was, a really interesting period of time. And then on the back end of that sort of 4-year period there, I was fortunate to be given an opportunity from a funds point of view inside that business. And I was working with a supply chain in China and noticed that supply performance was dropping. The number of units wasn't being produced each week as per contract. And a lot of people were arriving to our Zoom meetings because Teams wasn't really a thing back then. So our Zoom meetings with masks on started asking questions about what's going on, and we all know what happened.
Were they cagey on it?
They were extremely cagey.
What did they say?
Oh, look, the common response was everything's fine, Mr. Ben. We'll continue to deliver the numbers, but they were dropping.
You saw a drop in turnover.
Yeah, absolutely. So in production. So this was in about the October-November of 2019, and then as we know, by March of 2020, COVID was here. And the world changed. So
truth be told,
it wasn't quite here.
Over there, it was over east. Wasn't
it was correct. Yeah, you're right.
Over east.
Yeah, correct. So, and it was a really interesting period of time. Living in Melbourne, in a significant lockdown, or at least the start of a significant lockdown, was quite alarming and concerning.
Dan Andrews, he was at the helm of that.
That's
carry
correct.
on.
Yeah. So Dan and look, Dan did.
You're being very diplomatic.
Dan did as good a job as Dan could have done, I think. Okay. I think it was incredibly difficult.
I can see why you're in the position. You're very, very diplomatic. I think no one in Melbourne would agree with you.
Maybe not. Look,
maybe 92% of Melbourneites would say, "Sorry, mate, you're wrong."
Yeah, probably. But I think that what didn't happen was, there was deaths in Melbourne. There was people passing away in their homes daily, and it was really scary. Yeah. But what didn't happen, there wasn't a plague. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of the restrictions that were put in place saved lives, and I think that's an important takeaway. And I think under his leadership, it was incredibly difficult. But I think when you look at the bigger picture, I think he did an okay job. So. But for us, it was a really interesting period of time because the business, like many in Melbourne and Sydney on the East Coast that were quite significantly affected by COVID, were having the same conversations in boardrooms and Zoom calls around the East Coast, and that was what are we doing here? We need to cut costs. Our sales are dropping. We need to cut costs. And naturally, people were losing their jobs from right across the sector and a variety of other sectors on the daily. So for me, it was a really interesting period of time where I thought, well, it's probably the right time to move. And so, from there, I elected to take what ended up, I thought it would be 3 or 4 months. It ended up being 12 months off. I grew a huge beard, and
have you got photos?
I do. Yeah, I
send
can,
them through.
Sure.
Send them through. That Dimitri will love that. Send it through, mate. We'll chuck it up.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, grew this crazy beard. I'd never grown a beard before in my life.
Like Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Literally, yeah. And I've got a pic stitch of me and Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Okay.
So I'll send that through too.
Cool. That's what I was envisaging.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a bit wild, and it surprised a lot of people. But for me, it was a year away from work where I could do a fair bit of reflection on myself and the career to date and where I'd been, and then what I wanted to do moving forward. But probably more importantly, it was an opportunity for me to be the stay-at-home parent to our firstborn, who had arrived in the sort of December of 2019. So by the time I'd moved on from 2 times U in early 2020, Nate, who's our now 5.5-year-old, who I'm coaching Auskick for, was only a few months old. But I had the privilege and great fortune of building this amazing bond and connection with him as the stay-at-home parent for that 12-month period. And I still say to this day, that's the greatest 12 months of my career so far. Because the learnings that I took from that in my own space and my own time were invaluable. So from there, my very successful wife came home and at this point was working for a company called Frank Green.
Water bottles.
Small water bottle coffee cup company. And she was the chief marketing officer there. And she came home one day and said, look, the founder, Ben Young, who's an amazing sort of entrepreneur and highly regarded, it was after a chief commercial officer. And given my background and the roles I'd been in, he was interested in meeting me, and she came home and said, look, he wants to meet with you. You come in next week and have a coffee. And I said, there's no way I'm working with you. Like, I'm pretty comfortable here growing my beard and watching TV every day and not getting out of my tracky pants. I had a pretty good life, to be fair. There was obviously that urge to get back into work, of course, but I never really envisaged myself working with my wife. So that was the first conversation. The next week she came home again and said, look, he really wants to meet you. Will you please come in? I said, no, absolutely not. And then the third week she came home and said, look, you're coming in. He's bugging me now. You have to come in and meet him. Okay, so in I went.
In trackies?
Not quite, but wasn't far. No, beard was absolutely still there.
Yeah, that's the way.
Yeah, and it was probably the first time in 12 months I'd put a pair of jeans on, to be fair. So in I went, had really no intention of sort of ending up in a role there. And after what was meant to be a 45-minute coffee was a 3-hour brainstorming strategic meeting.
Love it.
And I'd agreed to terms at the end of the meeting. He completely sucked me into the inspirational vortex that is Ben Young. Awesome. And I started about 2 weeks later. So shipped Nate off to childcare.
Was that hard for you?
It was, yes and no. It's a really good question. Yes and no. I think there was obviously that separation anxiety after spending 12 months for me and for him, cool. Right? After spending 12 months together exclusively.
I'd love it.
Yeah, it was really special. But then you go from that into a CCO role where, you're not working 7.8 hours a day. You're working 12 hours a day right round the clock. And so with that in mind, it was difficult for both of us because you get so used to a process and a person, and then all of a sudden they disappear, especially at 1 year old. So that was interesting, but for me it was a great opportunity. And I sat in the CCO role for 4 months. I was sort of responsible largely for the wholesale channel of the business and sort of commercial partnerships and so forth. Restructured that part of the organisation and delivered some decent results. And then right place, right time again. The current sort of GMMD of the business decided to move on, and the founder wanted me to step into that role. So stepped into that role, and then from there the business just exploded. And I don't take any of the credit for our hypergrowth at Frank Green. The founder, who was largely responsible for innovation and product development, was just a remarkable thinker and had a real finger on the pulse when it came to what consumers want and what consumers need, and what, more importantly, they'll pay for. And then, my wife, being my wife, was running the marketing side of the business, and is, in my opinion, probably a little bit biased, but one of the best marketers in the business. And between the two of them, they really exploded our product offering and naturally our sales. And for me, sort of sitting in the MD seat, my biggest focus was, I call myself the firefighter at Frank Green. I was just putting out the variety of different fires that were sparking each day, which is a natural byproduct of hypergrowth, as well as being really sort of focused on the people, the culture, and putting the right people in the right roles. So I recruited and interviewed every single person that walked in our doors, and that was something I was really proud about. Yep. But for me, it was absolutely the most critical part of our business, because without the people, your business is nothing.
That's right.
And so I was sort of just hell-bent over that hypergrowth period of continuing to add really high-quality individuals who, obviously had the skills to do the work, but more importantly, they had the attitude over the aptitude. And that was, I'd like to think that they were my two big roles in the journey and the growth that was and is Frank Green. That was a great period of time with working with some great people, but what was missing for me was probably what had been in the back of my mind for a couple of years, and that was that real for-purpose community sort of caregiving space. And like I touched on right at the start, which I did touch on deliberately, that's a big part of my DNA. So I decided to, instead of just talking the talk, I tried to walk it and started to look for purpose, not-for-profit roles. And the Holyoake role popped up.
Okay, I was just about to say, is that how you got into mental health in addition?
Correct. So, and I will preface that by saying, I get asked often, do you have a lived experience or a family lived experience of alcohol or other drugs or mental ill health? And, I'm very privileged to be able to say that, no, I don't. But I'm really conscious of how that comes across too. As I touched on, and as I've probably realised more and more in this role, as well as in a leadership program that I'm currently participating in with Leadership WA called the Signature Program, I've probably had even more realisations about how lucky I am and the life I've lived to date. And so that's not lost on me, noting that I'm now leading, an AOD and mental health organisation. But I'm really privileged and proud to be leading the organisation. The work we do is so important.
For those unfamiliar with Holyoake, do you want to go into what you guys actually do?
Yeah, sure. So Holyoake's been around since 1975, so we're celebrating our 50-year anniversary this October, which is really exciting for us. We're the longest-serving AOD support service in Western Australia. So we were founded by an amazing gentleman by the name of John Keating, and his profile's on our website for those that are interested in learning about him and, I suppose, the history and journey of Holyoake. But what we do at our core is we provide people with free alcohol, other drug and mental health support services, and we do that in a variety of different ways. We also play really actively in the prevention space too. So we have an amazing prevention team that are largely based in the wheat belt, but we also have AOD prevention services across the state too. And we support people in that suicide prevention space and the AOD prevention space largely around education and awareness as well. So they're our three key pillars: AOD, mental health, and prevention. Okay. And then our service offering, is quite dynamic. We have 21 different programs of service that we deliver across WA, and those range from one-to-one counselling support through to, we have, I think, up to six group therapy program types as well. Wow. And then, like I said, we have that education pillar as well around prevention. So I think importantly, as I did mention, they're free services, and that's really important for people to be clear about. And we deliver our services under what we call the Holyoake approach, which is our way of working, which highlights the fact that everything we do is steeped in evidence-based data. We are highly clinically governed. We hire extremely qualified clinicians to provide support and care, and we do it in a person-centred way. So it's non-judgmental and it's person-centred, which is very, very, very important when you're supporting people through their addiction challenges or a family member's. And that's the final point I will touch on really quickly, is that we don't just specialise in the care of the individual. We are considered as a specialist of the family network too. So we provide counselling and support not only for the person with an AOD concern or a mental health concern, but we recognise the impact that has or the ripple effect that has on the broader family system, and we provide counselling and support to those people as well.
Ben, let's talk mining. Would you see in your role or through the business that there is addiction issues that come from people working in the mining industry? It's a stressful environment, right? Drugs and alcohol, I can only imagine, are used. And at what point are people becoming addicted? And then how do they seek out help?
Yeah. We support about 5,500 individuals each year, which equates to nearly 21,000 unique occasions of service each year. And of those, I don't have a hard statistic for you on the number of people that come from the mining sector, but we know anecdotally that it is high. We work with a couple of different mining organisations at the moment. I won't name names, but we do work with them to provide education and additional sort of upskilling of their internal workforces to support the people in their workforce with
great.
Their AOD concerns.
So other
challenges.
mining companies can, if
Absolutely.
they're watching this, they can contact Holyoakes and for support.
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
So we're very happy to have those conversations, and that's probably a part of our strategy in the long term around that diversification of revenue, noting that a lot of our funding does come from government. So it's a strategic play, but we know probably more importantly there's an absolute need to support people from that mining sector. We hear it all the time. There's some incredible organisations dedicated to supporting those people. You and I both know Miners Promise as one example.
Amazing.
But where we can help more people, we will absolutely explore that and look to do that. Ultimately, that's what we're here to do, is deliver community impact. When it comes back to specifically about people working in the sector, we know the mental load and the challenges associated with being away from home and being away from loved ones for extended periods of time. And we know that AOD is used largely as a coping mechanism for that loneliness or that that distance at times.
Missing out on those important moments of life.
Spot on. So we recognise that AOD, because it is a free, it's a legal drug, I will say, and in some scenarios it used to be a free drug that you could access on site. That's changing now, particularly in the last sort of 10 years. But it's a coping mechanism that helps people switch off. Or ultimately blunts or numbs the mental pain that might be associated with those challenges when you're away from family and loved ones consistently.
Yeah. Would you say there's a typical Holyoake client?
Great question. Not particularly. I'd say that, statistically speaking, all of that data sits on our website, and we have a higher percentage of male consumers than we do female consumers. Yep. But we are starting to see that percentage split even up a little bit. What we're really committed to, we're on our stretch wrap as an organisation, so we're deeply committed to supporting people, that identify as First Nations. And in addition to that, people from CALD communities. It's really important for us as an organisation that we are creating an inclusive environment where anyone from any background can receive support and care. Yep. And then I think the other sort of key call out here is that we have a lot of children who come into our service. So that's terrifying when you see children coming into your service who are receiving either support for their own alcohol or other drug use, or based on the effects of a mother or a father or a caregiver who has been affected by AOD consumption. But again, we're deeply committed to supporting those children to give them better futures and give them the coping mechanisms and skills they need to thrive.
Briefly describe a journey from someone coming in, knocking on the door, calling up saying, listen, I've got a problem. I need help. Yeah,
sure. So we have a really robust, what we call intake process. So again, like I touched on earlier around the Holyoake approach, it's a non-judgmental approach to care. And so we'll invite people in, we will undertake an assessment to understand where they're at in their journey, and also be really clear on what they might need and how we can support them. Traditionally from there, they'll come in, this is in one-to-one group therapy, one-to-one counselling sessions. They'll traditionally come in and they'll receive as many sessions of care as they need. And that might be, some people only need 3 to 4 sessions, others might need 6. And then in other circumstances, people might need ongoing or longer term care. And that's assessed on a sort of case-by-case basis. After their one-to-one care journey has concluded, and that might be for the first time, we have a lot of consumers who come back 2, 3, 4 times over the period of 10 years for support. We will, if they feel like they need ongoing support, we'll also transition them into our group therapy programs, which are 12-week cycle programs. And they basically jump in at any point and then they'll cycle through the 12 stages of that program over the 12 weeks or 12 sessions. And what we're doing there is creating continued support for people who feel they might need it. We often also see individuals who come in for their own support, and then they might actually bring a wife, a husband, another person in their family network in to experience the benefits of group therapy, either with them or on their own as well. So there's a lot of linkage in our journey for consumers. We make sure that, again, we're making it very clear to people that we can support others, not just them too.
That's great. What kind of workplace culture do you foster at Holyoakes?
Yeah, so we talk often at Holyoake about being a Holyoaker, and it's something that I'm really proud of. Being a Holyoaker is, I've touched on it already, but that real deep commitment to being a person-centred operator. We recognise that there's a person in front of us with their own complex needs and challenges and concerns, and we peel back those layers of potential judgment, and we just treat the person for the person that they are. We don't judge. We never will. We never do. It's really, really important to us, and it's so critical that people feel that sort of spirit of being a Holyoaker when you are the person providing the care. So it's all centred around the person at the end of the day. That
actually takes an amazing person to be able to do that, because look, it's human nature. I think by nature we're very judgmental. The human race are very judgmental. I know I'm super judgmental. If I was to be honest, which I am, I struggle with people that struggle with some of these issues. I struggle with friends and family that have struggled with these issues personally over the years. And it can take a toll as a person involved, sitting on the sidelines trying to work out what the fuck do I do here? Because you can put your all in, and if you get nothing back, it's tough. It's very tough.
Has a huge impact on those people. And,
when you were talking before about people out on site or wherever, and not even just when I was working out on site, even when I was home, there's been occasions over the years where I had a tough trot on it. I'm not looking for bloody sympathy, but I certainly know that when I've poured up a gin and tonic in an evening, I've made it a bloody double or a triple
to cope.
I wouldn't say to cope, I've just thought to myself, you know what? You deserve it.
Sure.
And I can only imagine that people with these drug and alcohol dependencies would probably say that to themselves too. They'd be like, you know what? You've worked hard. You've missed out on everything. Treat yourself. Treat yourself is probably a common term that I've heard in the mining industry over the years. So
and that I appreciate you sharing that. And I think from a clinician's perspective, our team hear that often, but they don't use that as weaponry for the process of recovery or the journey of recovery. That is a common reality, and it's where our clinicians listen. I often say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. They listen, and then we dive into the clinical evidence which supports the process of healing and recovery. So
beautiful.
It's but it's so critical that we are listening and we're hearing that right up front with our consumers, so we can support them from the get-go.
Mate, last one from me is what's some advice that you've been given that you've really taken on board and that you'd like to share? This is your moment to share. And if you feel comfortable, you can speak into the camera. You don't have to. But something that really resonates with you, that that it's the best advice you've heard, and pass it on.
Well, I appreciate that. I think I will probably segue back to Nick Marvin, who, to be fair, probably one of the best leaders I've ever worked for when I was at the Wildcats. And if he is watching this by some small chance, then hi, Nick. Nick always used to say to me when I was at the Wildcats, control the controllables. And it's something I've carried with me right throughout my career. It translates a little bit into the work I'm doing now. You know, we work in a space where our workforce, from time to time are carrying high levels of vicarious trauma. They are taking the impacts of their work home with them. As person-centred operators, we want to help everyone and want to help them as quickly as possible. But sometimes we can't. And so being really clear about the notion that we will control what we can control, it helps us be really clear on what we're doing, when we're doing it, and why we're doing it. And it helps us sort of, I suppose, navigate the frustrations of
I'm very much
care.
the same.
So,
I totally get that. I totally get that. I'm
So
very much the same.
It's big for me. I say it to myself daily. I've been saying it to myself since Nick said it to me many years ago. So, and then, alongside that, I think leaving your ego at the door is really, really powerful. I'll be frank, I do have a healthy ego. It's probably been a part of my career in a sense that it's really driven me and pushed me to be the best version of myself. But over the last couple of years, I've probably had a realisation from a leadership point of view that people just want to see the person. They don't want to see the ego. So I try to leave that at the door, and I think that enables me to be a better listener and a better leader. So they're probably a couple of the takeaways, but
that's beautiful, mate.
The big one for me is just controlling the controllables, staying focused on the things that we
Understand that
can
you can't
control.
control everything.
Precisely.
Very simple.
Because if you do, the irony of this conversation in Holyoake is that, sometimes that can lead to dependency, to mental illness, and many other challenges. So being really clear on what you can control is pretty important as a fairly simple life lesson.
Yeah, Ben, look, mate, thank you very much for coming and spending the time with us. I've learned a heap. I'll certainly be able to do everything that we can, the team will, to push Holyoake and everything that you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Not a problem, mate. Hey, thanks very much for tuning into another episode on The Gold Room. I hope you've taken a lot from this because everyone struggles. People struggle in their own different ways. And if you know someone that is struggling, then maybe a quick little look on the Holyoake's website. The details are in the show notes below. Thanks very much for tuning in again. Don't forget to like, comment, and ring that bell. Cheers.